Good evening from Washington. I'm Laura Ingraham, and this is the Ingraham Angle. I thought things were supposed to slow down in the summertime. What happened? Well, of course, there's no such thing as a slow news cycle these days, certainly not with President Trump. And we're going to have insight and analysis that you cannot and will not get anywhere else tonight. President Trump meeting with the British Prime Minister and the Queen today. And on Monday, he's set for that one-on-one meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Newt Gingrich is going to be here in just a moment. He's going to analyze the president's entire overseas trip and preview what's in store for Monday. And back here at home, a major development in the Mueller probe. Interesting timing, too. The DOJ announcing today new charges against 12 Russians for hacking the Democrats in the 2016 election. But is there any evidence of collusion? Doesn't look like it. It's the end of the week. So, you know, Raymond Arroyo is going to be here for Friday Follies, a special London edition. And we're going to bring you the latest on that overhyped Trump protest balloon flying madness above London, and then discuss the president's meeting with Her Majesty. Plus, Dinesh D'Souza joins us visit to unpack some of the most curious statements by the new odd couple, George W. Bush and his pal Bill Clinton. But first, our top story. Thousands of demonstrators hit the streets of London to protest the president's visit to England today, where Trump continued to challenge the global status quo. And as we reported last night, President Trump gave an interview with the London Sun newspaper, and he said British Theresa May's approach to Brexit could put a trade deal with the United States at risk. Talk about ruffling some feathers. At a press conference today, though, President Trump clarified things, and he shared his view on several international matters.
I didn't criticize the Prime Minister. I have a lot of respect for the Prime Minister. And unfortunately, there was a story that was done, which was, you know, generally fine, but it didn't put in what I said about the Prime Minister. And I said tremendous things. It's called fake news. You know, we solve a lot of problems with the good old recording instrument based on just trade in general and our other relationship, which will be fine. But the trade is a little bit tricky. We want to be able to trade, and they want to be able to trade. And I think we'll be able to do that. Okay? And I think she's doing a terrific job, by the way.
Prime Minister, I wonder whether you agree with the President of the United States that immigration has damaged the cultural fabric of Europe. And, President, perhaps you could elaborate on that remark. What do you mean by that?
You want
to go first?
I think it's been very bad for Europe. I think they better watch themselves, because you are changing culture, you are changing a lot of things, you're changing security.
The UK has a proud history of welcoming people who are fleeing persecution to our country. We have a proud history of welcoming people who want to come to our country to contribute to our economy and contribute to our society. And over the years, overall immigration has been good for the UK.
I wonder if, are you giving Russian President Vladimir Putin the upper hand heading into your talks, given that you are challenging these alliances that he seeks to break up and destroy?
See, that's such dishonest reporting, because, of course, it happens to be NBC, which is possibly worse than CNN. Possibly. Let me explain something. We have left NATO with more money, with more unity, with more spirit than NATO probably has ever had.
How would you characterize your relationship with the United Kingdom?
Well, I would say I give our relationship, in terms of grade, the highest level of special. So we start off with special. I would give our relationship with the UK, and now, especially after this 2 days, with your Prime Minister, I would say the highest level of special.
I'd like to have the highest level of special introduction of my next guest. Joining me now, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who's executive producer of the George Washington documentary, oh gosh, The First American, now available on Amazon Prime Video. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to see it on Amazon Prime. I've already watched it, but Newt Gingrich, great to see you as always, very special. What did you make of that appearance today with Theresa May after that Sun article that did have an audio component? So they did quote him, but apparently they didn't quote him fully on what he said about May. How did that go down?
I think sometimes Trump spends a fair amount of time making up lost ground that he lost. And, you know, they are allies. They are friends. I suspect he was embarrassed that it came out the way it did. She's got a very weak government and a lot of trouble, and that certainly didn't help any. But I thought the press conference actually helped her. And it was also, the tone was about right, I think. It was, you know, Trump has actually had a very good trip. And I think even the New York Times admitted in a shocking editorial that he had accomplished a great deal of what Obama had tried to do with NATO, but had failed to do. And I thought, you know, Trump must have gotten a lot done if even the New York Times had to say it.
I think it's like this. If someone comes to our country, a foreign leader, and criticizes our president or our policies, we don't much like that in the United States.
Right.
And I think Donald Trump doesn't like that. When we had previous Mexican presidents doing that about our immigration, I know I hit him hard on the radio. It doesn't feel right. So going and giving that interview to the Sun, I agreed with Sun. It was a ridiculous mistake.
It was a mistake. He said, look, he's had a very good trip.
But he clarified it and he apologized, apparently.
He's done very good things overall. And he had a mistake. I mean, Trump is a little bit like a baseball player who strikes out but also hits a lot of home runs. And there's some balance in there. And I think that that's part of just his style and his nature.
And he's still new to it. And he still is relatively new. It's a year and a half into this and still lots of successes. The criticism of the president, and I've got to play this for you. This was Tom Donilon, former national security advisor for Barack Obama, today on CNN. Let's watch.
I would not have the summit. In terms of the one-on-one meeting,
if you were advising this president, you would tell him cancel it.
I wouldn't have scheduled it in the first place. It wasn't well prepared. There are no goals. It wasn't coordinated with the allies. We don't have the kind of unity you'd like to have coming into something like this.
There are no goals. How many summits did Barack Obama have that ended up being more like just parties that kept the catering office, well busy in the White House? That's ridiculous.
Well, I think it's inappropriate to measure the comments of an Obama-era official as though they're real. I mean, these people represented a worldview of weakness. They represented a worldview of, quote, leading from the rear. They represented a worldview. John Kerry's model of being Secretary of State was any 4-star hotel with any 5-star restaurant anytime. And they then thought that was negotiating. I think that if you watch what Trump is achieving, for example, NATO members have now absolutely committed to get to the level of commitment that President Bush asked for, President Obama asked for. Trump got him to say yes. And there are a number of these things that are happening that I think represent a substantial gain, partly by force of his personality.
And he's different from the usual. I mean, people, and I think a lot of it, Newt, is a lot of these smart people at the Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings Institution, all of these well-heeled think tanks, they've spent their lives dedicated to geopolitical understanding and foreign policy, written these long articles most people haven't read. And a lot of them were responsible for screwing up the post-Cold War era, as Pat Buchanan said on my radio show today. This guy comes along with, like, no experience. And he's like, this is ridiculous. Why are we paying so much of this burden? You guys aren't coughing up more money. And why shouldn't we have a better relationship with Putin? We're not going to agree on a lot, but we talk to China, and they certainly have a much bigger military and in many ways more aggressive, more of a threat. And they're like, oh, you can't say that. Why?
Well, look, I think two things. First of all, Trump is probably the most unusual president since Andrew Jackson, in that his personality, his style, his aggressiveness. Second, I think what drives the foreign policy establishment crazy is that their prestige, their role in the world is because they're really smart and they write really good papers.
It's too complicated for the little people to understand. Right. Well, and Donald Trump comes in, he says, he explains it all. I says, well, we can actually do better.
And he devalues all of them because he doesn't need them. So they're all sitting around going, oh, my God, what if the new model became electing a president who didn't need us? That's why you see this frenzy on both the right and the left.
Oh, no, the right is worse. The right, let's face it, these people on the right, and there are about this many, 5, they're talking just to themselves and maybe a few people on MSNBC, and that's a dwindling audience. God bless them. Today, these indictments were handed down. Very long indictments. Russian GRU officers, intelligence officers. What do you make of this? There's serious allegations, hacking into American accounts, placing malware into American prominent Democrat accounts like Podesta, the DNC. Fairly serious. Very serious.
Well, they're very serious. They raise two questions in my mind. The first is, why is it that Mueller would decide to release this just before the president sees Putin? It's an odd timing. I don't frankly care personally because I think it actually strengthens Trump's hand to walk in and say to Putin, you're telling me you guys didn't do that? We just indicted 12 of your people. But the second question I'd raise, which is a very interesting question, if we're going to start going after people, if we're engaged in hacking in the United States, there are going to be so many Chinese that we should be indicting, that I think this is a very serious standard to start setting, probably the right standard. But it does mean we're going to go after other countries' nationals in their own homeland and indict them. That will be a big change.
And Trump did say today he would confront Russia about the question of meddling. This was before the indictments were handed down. Let's watch.
Will we be talking about meddling? And I will absolutely bring that up. I don't think you'll have any, gee, I did it, you got me. There won't be a Perry Mason here, I don't think, but you never know what happens, right? But I will absolutely, firmly ask the question.
Well, they have a narrative that they can't get off. Trump's cozy to Putin and mean to our allies. This is just, it's a drumbeat you hear all day long, but sometimes with your friends, you have to have a real honest relationship.
If they would listen to what Trump said, what President Trump said to Chancellor Merkel, when he went right at her and said, don't accept the Russian pipeline for natural gas.
Nord Stream 2.
Buy our liquid natural gas instead. He's threatening Putin with billions of dollars of losses. And that was certainly not the act of somebody who is in Putin's favor.
No, and the more we are able to triangulate with Russia and China, that's also a good thing. I mean, we don't want to drive Russia into the arms of China. That would be a disastrous point for us. And Trump sees that. I mean, again, someone who has had no experience until running for president on all these issues, I think he continues to show up so many of these people on their supposed expertise on matters that, you know, they are complicated, they are important. But Donald Trump said, it doesn't have to be this linear on all these things. Well, we can have better relationships with more countries.
He also has a model in his own head that we live in an age when leaders can communicate directly with leaders.
Right.
Changes the whole nature of diplomacy. He does that with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. He does it with the president of China. He's doing it now with the president of Russia. I would, as Churchill once said, you know, jaw, jaw, jaw is better than war, war, war. I would much rather have them talking than have us drifting more and more towards a real confrontation.
And now we have Democrats saying we shouldn't talk. I mean, in the 80s, they were like, all we should do is talk to the Soviet Union when we needed them. I have to ask you something, speaking of the 80s. They're making this big deal of the balloon. We're going to talk about it later with Raymond Arroyo, the big Trump balloon and the protests. Yeah, there are protests in London. Remember the protests against Reagan and against Bush. We have some of the video. Reagan in '82, Bush many times, London, Berlin, hundreds of thousands of people in Spain. That was '82 in Berlin for Reagan. We had fires. We had huge mass protests. And yet we're supposed to believe, oh, it's only Donald Trump. We're the most hated we've ever been because of Donald Trump. You hear that all day long today.
Well, listen, as you know, I spent a fair amount of time now in Rome. We recently was in Paris. I don't think that we're hated. I think that people on the left react like people on the left. And, of course, a lot of the Reagan demonstrations were paid for by the Soviet Union,
the communists,
which was actually subsidizing the peace movement, something which liberals don't like to concede. But I think that, so somebody puts up a big balloon. Why should they? I mean, my first reaction is, this is the best they've got? This is their idea of an intellectual answer to Trump?
Final, one more point. We're running late, but on the trade issue, he's getting slammed for these tariffs. One of the top most respected analysts on financial matters from Alliance, had a great quote. I think actually we can play it if you don't mind. Let's just listen to this because it blows away what everyone is saying about tariffs and whether Trump can win a trade war. Let's watch.
We are winning and we will win the trade war. And I think just look at the performance of U.S. markets relative to China and relative to others. I call it the Reagan moment for trade, that when people realize that at the end of the day, the U.S. will prevail because it's a less open economy, because it's a more dynamic economy.
He's like, they'll see this Trump approach to trade is working.
Let's face reality. We're the largest market in the world. Everybody else needs access here more than we need access anywhere.
Newt Gingrich, very special.
Good to be with you.
Very special. It's great to see you, as always. We'll see you. I got to get to Rome this summer. Please, I got to get there. Up next, Mueller indicts Russians, as I said, for hacking the Democrats. What about collusion? We're going to have a full report directly ahead. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced today charges against 12 Russian intel officers for hacking Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign during the 2016 election. Well, a lot of people saying the timing is curious, given that Trump is meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki on Monday. Rosenstein also made this important clarification.
There's no allegation in this indictment that any American citizen committed a crime. There's no allegation that the conspiracy changed the vote count or affected any election result.
Not quite at collusion yet, are we? Well, let's bring in some experts to see what they think. Kim Strassel is a columnist with the Wall Street Journal. Saul Weisenberg, the attorney and former independent counsel deputy in the Clinton Whitewater probe. And Scott Bolden is a Democratic strategist and an attorney. All right, let's start with you, Scott. Your reaction to today's handing down of these indictments against Russian operatives, intel officers with GRU.
I think the stream keeps rolling forward. 12 indictments to go with the other 20, and then you got 5 convictions. The whole issue here is that America and DOJ, but in particular the White House, have got to take this meddling seriously, and I think these indictments further that process along. What I worry about most, whether I'm a Democrat or Republican, is if this president doesn't accept it or doesn't take it seriously, what are our administrative agencies and our government doing to prevent this from bothering or affecting the midterms or even 2020?
Yeah, hacking,
that's a real risk.
Right, hacking is a real problem. I mean, we had one of their top intel officials today saying that our infrastructure is highly vulnerable to hacks, which could shut down our entire power grid in this country. Really serious stuff. But bean
and our
counting,
border too, by the way.
And our border. Bean counting indictments, however, does not, Saul Weisenberg, get us to this grand theory of collusion upon which this investigation was initially started and kicked off. But you've read more indictments than I would ever have read in my life. What did you glean from what dropped today? And do you think the timing is in any way, at the very least, curious, Saul?
Well, that's a lot of questions. Let me start with the timing being curious or suspicious. I doubt it. I don't know how long the Putin trip or summit has been planned. I've heard it was only a few weeks. So I really seriously doubt that. A couple of things, though. You talk about indictment counting, and you talk about the investigation being about collusion originally. From the beginning, the investigation was also about Russian interference. Okay. Yep. Also, whether they colluded with any people here, but also about Russian interference in the election. And I think this indictment goes to the heart of that. And it's real and it's serious, and it certainly buys Bob Mueller a lot of time. And he can say, hey, folks, this is what I've been doing. And it wasn't very easy to do and to put together. Now, to Scott's point, this may seem petty, but let's you talk about indictment counting and bean counting. This is not 12 indictments. It's one indictment of 12 people, okay? And that's
right,
we've
that
had
was
a
petty.
That was
You're right,
petty.
that was petty.
By you or by me?
By you.
But no, by you. But the other thing to remember here is that, and Scott will validate me on this, and I know you will too, Laura. You don't need much. There's no collusion whatsoever here. It's strictly a Russian operation. It's very serious. We should all be very concerned about it. However, under conspiracy law in the United States, once you have a conspiracy, it takes very little to connect a new person to that conspiracy. Still have to find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And it looks like they're trying to do that in a very circuitous way with Roger Stone. There's a lot of reporting on the Roger Stone issue, whether he knew about when these emails were going to drop, and he denies all of this and said they're trying to bankrupt him. He's very adamant about this. But Kimberly, the Democrats were, and it's not surprising, absolutely gleeful at the Rosenstein announcement. Let's watch.
This is no ordinary criminal case. This is a criminal case that potentially implicates the president and people around him on his campaign.
Donald Trump likes to describe this as a witch hunt. Well, we just found some witches, and they were indicted.
My hope and prayer is that this president and his allies will, again, cease and desist on calling the Mueller investigation a witch hunt.
Kimberly, Mueller has racked up a lot of indictments. I mean, Manafort, some of his conduct goes back many years, predates all of this, but nevertheless, on the pure issue of trying to influence our election and hack into our systems, it does seem like Mueller is coming up with some, facts that are very important, and it looks like they could probably get some convictions. Whether or not that matters, because they're not going to get these people coming to the United States. They seem to be hot on the trail of something here.
Well, look, what was missing from all of those comments is the realization that, yes, there is this new indictment engaged in 12 people, but none of it had to do with collusion. None of it has to do with obstruction of justice from the Trump team, as Rosenstein made very clear, and as he did the last time they came out and named Russian nationals who they had charged with hacking and being engaged in our election. And I think that this is the one disingenuous aspect of the Mueller probe, which frustrates a lot of Americans out there, which is if he's spending 95% of his time looking to unravel plots of Russian infiltration here, it would be nice if he could come out and make that clear, because the press certainly doesn't want to go there. The Democrats, they still are obsessing and every day making it out to sound as though there's an imminent arrest of a Trump official coming at any moment, when in fact, even those convictions or guilty pleas or indictments that the special counsel has filed have been unrelated to any of the original accusations. We've got a couple of them on the catch-all of lying to the FBI and one for a supposed, a wire, like money laundering fraud from a decade ago.
Well, and I also think we have to remember, even Rosenstein today said, no evidence that this changed the outcome of the election, no evidence of an American being involved here. There may be, but as of now, everyone should be careful how they describe this, Kimberly. That's well taken. The White House's comment on these indictments today, I've got to read it. Today's charges include no allegations of knowing involvement by anyone in the campaign, no allegations that the alleged hacking affected the election result. This is consistent with what we've been saying all along. Scott, another thing a friend of mine raised with me, and I hadn't thought of it, and I wish I had. Doesn't this also underscore how important it was for Hillary or anyone in government, high levels of government, not to have unsecure email servers? Remember back when we discovered that this email server had been unsecure that she was using, very unusual the way she was keeping her emails, that Peter Strzok, when this issue was raised with him about whether this could have been compromised, pretty much every expert believes the Russians probably were able to hack into her system. They're going into Podesta. They're trying to go into hers. He decided not to engage on that issue. Well, curious, if they're so worried about Russian hacking, they didn't seem all that worried about hacking into Hillary's emails.
Well, the federal government and those agencies appropriate ought to be concerned about that. If they're unsecure processes.
But this was the Secretary of State having an email server in a house or in the bathroom,
you sound like you
and then the
blame
Russians
Hillary Clinton for her
I am
email being
saying that if you guys are worried about Russia, Scott, why were you not worried about the Secretary of State, as smart and savvy as she was, trying to circumvent the normal course of business in government and making her communications vulnerable and everything that was in them?
I think they were, and that's why they said
she was worried about that.
I think the government,
when she was caught, she was.
There were rules. There were rules against how
she violated them all.
Absolutely, and whether she was reckless or careless or what have you, that's been said. That's been said.
Yeah, Saul, go ahead.
Well, the indictment actually appears to say, it doesn't mention her by name.
Yeah,
apparently on the very day that the president said, Russia, if you're listening, find those missing emails, they apparently later that night made an attempt to go into her server and to find them. And apparently, according to the indictment, it was unsuccessful. They have to be describing her. But if I could just speak very briefly to one of Kimberly's points, I think it's wrong to say this has nothing to do with his original charter or what he was originally supposed to be looking at. It's true.
I never said that. I didn't say it had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
I said rather that I think it would behoove him to come out and make clear that this has been one of his main focuses.
But it's in the document.
He said that.
It's
in
the directive. He said that already.
Rosenstein has already said that for him. My point is that you're right. It's a very important point. It doesn't look like they have anything close to a collusion case.
They're
we
coming
certainly
up
would have seen more evidence
They're coming
of this.
up empty on it, Saul.
No, they're not.
But he was supposed to also be looking. Hold on, Scott. He was supposed to also be looking at Russian interference in general, and this goes to the heart of that. And I think it's very wrong to have said to him, it's a witch hunt. Now what's he going to do? He goes and he wants to get tough with Putin and say, that, look what you've done. Look at what your people have been indicted for. You had to have known about it. What's Putin going to say? Well, this is the guy you've been attacking. You say he's running a witch hunt. So I don't think that's good.
He's never going to say that to Putin either.
So, all right, last word, Scott, and then
let's talk about real briefly collusion, right? The GOP believes that since there's no collusion, that therefore somehow the White House and Donald Trump are absolved of something. Collusion is not a crime. It's an act. It'll be in the body of the indictment. The charges, whether money laundering or something else, that'll be what the charges are. And the other important thing is that this investigation is about Russia, but it's also about whether there were Russian connections to to Donald Trump.
All right, Kimberly,
let's remember that.
word.
So Mueller could have solved all this and made it a lot easier for himself. With the press out there suggesting all the time that he has been working nonstop against just on the Trump campaign, that this was his sole focus. We know the Mueller campaign leaks. Their team put stuff out. They could have corrected that impression, made clear that one of their focuses was on the Russians, or the bigger focus was on that. And it wouldn't have caused the White House to then suggest that this probe was about something very different.
I mean, the PR on this has always been, it's someone in the Trump campaign, it's Manafort. The PR has always, separate from the legal issues, Scott and Saul raised great points, but separate from the legal issues, the PR is always Donald Trump himself is pulling the lever, or someone else at high levels. And I think Kimberly's right about that. Great segment. Have a great weekend, guys. Up next, Raymond Arroyo will be here to explain how Trump's visit with the Queen actually went really well today, and why the media are so obsessed that Trump has this little protest balloon, which I think is cute. A British edition of the Friday Follies next. I didn't even realize it's Friday the 13th, and that means, among other things, it's time for a British edition of the Friday Follies. Oh, Queen Elizabeth welcomed President Trump and Melania to Windsor Castle today. For more on this historical event, the significance of it, we're joined by New York Times bestselling author of the Will Wilder series and Fox News contributor Raymond Arroyo. Raymond, this was
what
awesome.
A day.
What do you think? How do you think this went?
Well, first of all, we're dealing with a woman who has been on the throne since 1952. She's met, and I counted it out, with 13 American presidents.
Do we have any photos of
Yes,
them?
we do. From Truman back in 1951, before she was on the throne. Then there was Eisenhower in 57. And then after that, she met with everybody from Ford to Carter. President Carter...
FDR. No, that's Truman.
Truman. Believe it or not, President Carter kissed the Queen Mother on the lips, causing her to proclaim, "No one's done that since my husband died." so there have been some snafus. Today went swimmingly, actually. And by the way, today, 13 presidents have met with Queen Elizabeth, because she met with Herbert Hoover in a hotel room.
Oh, look at her smiling. Oh, look at her smiling. She's having a good time with Trump.
She had a great time with Trump today.
I love her.
This was a very gracious, beautiful tea. They got along well. She was smiling and pointing him where to go. There was one awkward moment.
Oh, must you go to the awkward moment?
Well, I couldn't help but imagine what was going through the mind of the Queen here as they reviewed this honor guard.
Oh, Donald, would you move to the left? Oh, you're blocking me, you young
chap.
Where
are you? Where'd she go?
I
want to tell you.
Oh, he has no clue as to where he's supposed to walk here.
Queenie, I got to say, you were wonderful in The Crown. So good in The Crown.
Don't put me up. Now we're in trouble. We're doing bubbles in their heads, not ours.
Oh, no, she's so... I just love her. I'm sorry.
She was gracious.
1939, she sat, not as queen, but she sat as the daughter of the king with FDR.
I'm not sure if that happened.
Didn't happen?
No, that was her mother. That was her mother, Elizabeth.
Oh, my God, it looked like her. I was going to say, how could she be so young?
She looked almost exactly like
I got that wrong.
It was her mother.
Edit that out.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
But then there were, in central London, these protests at the same moment that flooded the streets, which it's kind of uncharacteristic that you'd have this level of protest, given the Chinese president, Putin, Robert Mugabe, have all come to town with virtually no protest. But it drew a huge crowd.
Oh, it's a party.
Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain challenged one of these protesters, a woman named Ash Sakar, and she claimed to be protesting Trump's immigration policies. And did it get ugly?
Oh, let's watch.
This.
I'll be marching in Westminster tomorrow alongside thousands of other people who found the policy of border separations unconscionable.
Yep.
Who think that the sight of our elected Prime Minister holding Donald Trump's hand is an utter embarrassment.
Did you find Obama deporting 3 million people unconscionable? I'd go and check out some basic facts about your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero. I'm a communist, you idiot.
You didn't plan any protests against him, did you?
The hero of the centerpiece of the protest today was that Trump baby balloon, which I think is adorable. Right. I have no problem with a baby balloon. I think it's adorable. I want to hit it around with my kids. CNN covered it as if it actually was the visiting head of state, Raymond. Look at that thing.
Wait till you see this coverage. This is hilarious. They were covering every moment of this floating balloon.
It's so cute.
Nick, you've been all over the Trump baby balloon. What is the latest?
Yes, obviously not many major stunning developments here. It's been up in the air for 35 minutes. Nothing's changed there. It's got about another hour and 25 under the permission granted by London local authority, actually London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. Now, you've got to bear in mind there's a lot of political context around this balloon. Just to repeat what it is, Donald Trump as a baby, as an infant, in a nappy or a diaper, holding a mobile phone, obviously where he dispatches his favourite weapon of war, Twitter.
His favorite weapon of war.
Nappy is holding a nappy with his cell phone.
Here's the amazing thing here. It was a 19-foot balloon.
It's like a Macy's Day Parade. The way you're shooting it, all our cameramen
but it's
there.
a tiny
the way you
balloon.
shoot the balloon.
But here's the amazing thing.
Shut up.
If you watch closely, the people surrounding it, these are like the Israelites around the golden calf. They were beating drums and singing songs to this Trump weeble, and they attributed the presence of the balloon with driving Trump away from central London. This was practically a pagan religious
Imagine if you
festival.
did something like that with Obama, what they would have said it was, you know.
It's very curious. You know, the Turkish president, Erdogan, was just here. Erdogan was here not long ago. He's charged with horrible atrocities.
Oh my God! They were smashing the security detail. Put him in the hospital.
Here, when he was here in the United States, he goes there. There are almost no protests. But the last big protests like this were when George Bush visited during the Iraq War. 100,000 people showed up in the streets. They selectively get outraged.
Bush equals terrorist. Here's some of the headlines. Headlines: thousands of the Reagan, then the Bush. A region inflamed in protest. New York Times. Marchers in London denounce Bush visit. Thousands of people in London, thousands of people in Europe. They have a long memory about conservative slights, but they have a very, very short memory about these types of historical.
As Piers Morgan was alluding to, it seems as if the outrage is selective. If Obama was guilty of doing the same thing Trump is, why didn't you have a protest then?
All right, Raymond, thank you. And globalist much, some former presidents level thinly veiled criticisms of Trump at the NATO summit. Dinesh D'Souza here to explain.
Welcome to Mitsubishi. Would you be interested in the test drive? Great sound system.
Some demands of our European counterparts, but two former occupants of his office thought it was necessary, of course, to take shots, thinly veiled, at our commander-in-chief.
I view the role of the United States as very important. The truth of the matter is the way the world is today, that if the U.S. takes the lead, others tend to follow.
Do you really want to say, we're going to make everybody have a big military, but we're not going to help anybody build their own future and change their own lives? I don't think so.
That's right. The new best buds, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, scolded the current president for essentially doing what they could not, or would not, take NATO to task for their decades of free riding on the United States. To discuss the latest edition of The Globalists Striking Back, let's bring in Dinesh D'Souza, whose new documentary, Death of a Nation, comes out August 3rd. Everyone's very excited. His book as well. Dinesh, it's a little low, I think, isn't it, to take shots at the president while he's abroad? Even, you know, we know what they were talking about. They didn't mention him by name, but come on.
Well, the very fact that two guys who ran against each other from opposite parties can come together like this shows how Trump has changed the political cartography, the whole map of international relations. Now, in a sense, this should have been done in 1992 when the Soviet Union collapsed, because the whole NATO alliance was assembled for the purposes of anti-communism. In fact, some of it even goes back to World War II. The reason we pay for the defense of places like Germany and even Japan is we were afraid of those countries remilitarizing in the way that they did in the 30s and 40s. So an accounting, a re-examination is long overdue. It took an outsider, Trump, to do it. And to watch these old geezers complain about it, these guys have been like toy soldiers who walk into the wall and keep going. The examination was overdue in their time, and it's happening finally now.
Well, Pat Buchanan was on radio with me, I guess it was yesterday, and he said, look, the days of the open border endless trade deals with no amendments. That day is over. Endless wars, those days are over. So it's the last gasp in many ways of that old political establishment that was a bipartisan cabal in many ways, really geared against the people, weren't listening to the people. And look, they were both two-term presidents, but on the issue, the blue-collar issues that we care about, manufacturing, jobs, trade, immigration, they were both total disasters.
Well, what I find amusing is people focus on the injustice of illegal immigration to people, to natives, to people in America. But I'd like to point out the injustice of illegal immigration to legal immigrants. I'm a legal immigrant. It took me several years to go through the immigration process. Many of us don't come from countries where you can just jump over a wall or swim across a river. It's very difficult to get to America, and there's a line. So the illegal immigrant is actually jumping the line against the interests of the legal immigrant who's standing in line. That aspect of the injustice of it has rarely been pointed out. The Democrats, and we see this also with Clinton and Bush, they're conflating legal and illegal immigration as if they amount to the same thing.
Oh, he did that. He did that all day long at that event in Arkansas. And George W. Bush, again, a very nice man. I like him personally, but he just gets it wrong on immigration every single time, but he's just utterly confident. He throws out words like nativism, isolationism, protectionism. They just trip off his tongue without any reference to the current political dynamic. And Dinesh, this is what he said today, or yesterday, I guess, about the immigration issue.
I'm disturbed by the debate that's taking place because I think it undermines the goodness of America.
So, Dinesh, you're a bad person if you don't agree with the Bush more open borders, amnesty plus idea of the world. You're a bad person. That's very Christian.
I mean, this immigration debate is so filled with cliches. Most of these cliches happen to be wrong. Even the people who say that America was, in a sense, created by immigrants, that's a half-truth. America was actually a country created by settlers. Settlers are the people who create the original country that immigrants subsequently want to move to. Immigrants are attracted by the kind of society that settlers build. They find it preferable to their own society. That's why they immigrate. But that distinction, again, is often lost by people who say America was created by immigrants.
Dinesh D'Souza, looking forward to your film. Thank you so much for being with us. And I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I saw some of the headlines out of Boston this week. Check this out. Speaking of immigration, the city council held a hearing this week on whether to grant voting rights to some non-citizens in local elections. Voting rights. Now, the measure is reportedly at a standstill because some of the council members, they're getting flooded with calls and emails from residents who are understandably quite angry about the idea. What a surprise. Joining me with reaction about this and a lot more, Pam Bondi, Florida's Republican Attorney General. Now, Pam, we have seen this issue pop up in California where there's been a push for, of course, full health care benefits for illegal immigrants and driver's licenses. Everybody has driver's licenses. Concern about voter fraud. But in Boston, it would be people with green cards, but lots of categories of people who are legally in the country, but not yet citizens. What do you think about this?
Well, you know, we're obviously a nation of laws. They're doing this in Maryland, too. They've started it in various cities and local elections in Maryland. It's not illegal in local elections, but it is in state and federal. So, Laura, just talking about the voter fraud, my gosh, how do you distinguish? In Florida, on the ballot, you have multiple races. So how do you know that people, first of all, what kind of ID are they going to use? And then what are they going to use, their green card to come vote? And then are they going to create separate ballots to ensure that they don't vote in state and federal races? Because if they do, they could go to prison or be deported. So I don't even know from a practical standpoint how they're going to make that work.
Well, it reminds me of some of the push to legalize marijuana. You know, start with, oh, it's okay, it's medical marijuana. Then it's
oh, I've been living that in Florida.
Yeah, the door wide open, and then all of a sudden you're, you know, in Colorado, which I love, but a lot of people think that's a big mistake. I got to move on to what they're doing to Brett Kavanaugh. The Hill had a piece today saying that Murkowski and Collins, two more pro-choice type Republican senators, both look like they were inclined to view his nomination favorably, I guess perhaps to support his nomination. Well, that would kill the Democrats' chances of derailing Kavanaugh. So now this is just great. Now they are trying to get him by association to this Me Too movement by saying a judge he clerked for, Alex Kaczynski on the Ninth Circuit, himself was charged with abusing or accused of abusing clerks. How did Brett Kavanaugh not know about this? This is how low it gets. Tell us about this story and where you think this is going to go.
Well, I think these are the extremists of the party, and they have nothing on Judge Kavanaugh. So that's why they're going to go after him with everything they've got. This ridiculous rhetoric. They started off right away saying he threatens American lives by his opinions is ridiculous. Let me tell you about my senator, Bill Nelson, in Florida. Bill Nelson, after President Trump said 4 people, gave us our 4 nominees, he said he would blanketly oppose all 4. Now, how absurd is that when he previously had supported one of them to be on the bench? So it makes no sense. And, these Democrats can either stand shoulder to shoulder, Bill Nelson can, with the extremist of his party, or they can follow the laws. Elections have consequences, and this is our nominee. The 3 things that I always say are so important in a judge, and especially a justice, are intelligence, integrity, and humility. No one will quarrel that he's brilliant.
Yeah. He's
you
brilliant.
and I know he is beyond reproach.
No,
and I got to know him. You know him much better than I, but I got to know him on a personal level because I hired his law clerk as my Solicitor General. And getting to know him, what was so impressive to me about Judge Kavanaugh, his humility. He is a real guy.
It's
and
pathetic.
When he says he reveres the law, he means
is pathetic. What they're doing is pathetic. It's transparent, and it's sickening. It's not going to work. So that's all the good stuff. Pam, have a great weekend. We really appreciate it.